All right, guys, kind of a short one here. Visual and contact approaches. We're going to briefly go over these as well as some DPE questions that have commonly been asked in the past. So kind of just to start it out, visual approaches, here's what you would need to know if they gave you one of those questions like, okay, tell me about visual approaches, what do you need, what are the ATC requirements, so on and so forth. So what it actually is, it's an ATC clearance or authorization, if you will, to proceed visually and clear of clouds to an airport while you still retain your IFR flight plan and your radar services. Now, unlike a contact approach, ATC can actually assign this to you without you having asked. So if you're in a situation where you've heard on the radio that people up in front of you are being assigned contact approaches and that is not something that you want, it's your responsibility to let ATC know that as soon as possible. If you don't want one, if it's not desired, you can also request it yourself if they haven't already given it to you. So what you have to have the airport or the aircraft to follow in sight, either one of those two. You have to have VFR conditions. Now that's just basic VFR. That's 1,000-foot ceilings and 3 statute miles. And you have to have a reasonable expectation. You, as well as ATC, has to have a reasonable expectation that you're going to be able to maintain those conditions from the point that you got the clearance all the way until you get to the airport. Now, one question that kind of comes up on some check rides is, do you have to follow 91.155? Okay, 91.155 is the part of the FARS that goes over, okay, if I'm in class Bravo, I have to remain 3 statute miles clear clouds, Charlie airspace, 3 statute miles, 500 feet below, 1,000 feet above, so on and so forth. Okay, the answer to that question is no, unless it's required by your OPSECs. Now, unless you're a 135 operator, you're probably not going to have OPSECs. So common questions that you might get by a DPE on a check ride is, can you do one in an airport that doesn't have any kind of weather reporting capability? The answer is yes, but ATC has to have some kind of weather report, whether it be a PIREP, at least in the local area, something to that nature, to where they have a very reasonable expectation that you're going to be able to fly from the point where they give you the clearance down to the airport and maintain that basic VFR. So another one is, can you perform a visual approach to a runway while other aircraft are conducting ILS to either a parallel runway, an intersecting runway, whatever moniker you want to put on it? The answer is always yes, so long as ATC gives you the authorization. Now that may involve land and hold short operations for some of the other aircraft that are working, and that may involve one for you. That's kind of just on a case-by-case ATC assigned basis. So if you have the airport in sight but not the aircraft to follow, can you get a visual approach? The answer to that one is yes, so long as ATC clears you, but ATC will retain all of their responsibilities for safe separation standards that are outlined in the JO order as well as in the FARS and the AIM. They're also responsible for your wake turbulence avoidance, at least until you get that aircraft in sight. So does a visual approach have a common missed approach procedure that everybody does? No, and the reason why is because it's not an instrument approach procedure, it's just a clearance. So there's no plate that actually goes along with the visual approach. Now, one note on this that you guys might want to read up on there are charted visual flight procedures. It's called a CVFP. That's something that's going to be detailed in the AIM. That's in the exact same section if you go to study the visual approaches and the contact approaches. They are actually charted, and they're established for environmental and noise considerations. In some cases, they're also established for just to make it more efficient for people to get into certain airports. They're going to have landmarks, very similar kind of to a sectional chart. They're only primarily used for turbojet aircraft, but that's not to say that they might be given to to other aircraft if it's if there's an airport where one of those procedures would work. But anyway, you guys can read on that, read up on those on your own. So, can you refuse an ATC direction to perform a visual approach? The answer is yes. You can refuse anything that ATC clears you. If you don't believe that it's going to be conducive to you getting on the ground safely. So, and the correct phraseology for that is helicopter, whatever, unable. So that's usually the pretty common questions. Now the contact approach, this one is generally associated with a much higher degree of risk because this is a visual approach. This is kind of just landing at an airport in VFR conditions, and I kind of get some of the IFR benefits. A contact approach is different. So unlike on a visual approach, this is never something that ATC is just going to come out of the blue and say, hey, would you like a contact approach? Okay, you have to specifically request that from ATC. You have to have at least 1 statute mile of visibility and remain clear of clouds, and you have to have some kind of a reasonable expectation to continue the approach all the way to the airport and remain in those conditions. Now, the controllers can only authorize it when they have some information about your destination. You got to have 1 statute mile of weather that is reported. So doing this at an airport that doesn't have an operable or doesn't have weather reporting capability, period, that's probably not something you're going to be able to get. It has to have some kind of a standard instrument approach procedure. It's got to have VOR and ILS, something that's published that you can use to get down to that airport in the case where you fly into the clouds and you need to actually get back on the approach. They still have to provide you with the same separation standards as every other aircraft that's on an IFR flight plane. So you are required to make sure that you're clear of obstacles for the entire way there as well. So common DP questions on that. Can a contact be used in lieu of an SIAP? It's yes. Again, that's provided that ATC is going to clear you for it and you're able to keep those visibility and cloud clearance requirements we just talked about. A couple other questions that DPs have asked in the past that I can remember off the top of my head is, does a contact approach close your IFR flight plan? No, it does not. There's a couple of different ways that IFR flight plans get closed. If you're landing at a towered airport, the tower will close it. If you're landing at a non-towered airport, you have to do it either by calling flight service on the phone or talking to them over the radio, something to that effect if you haven't filed it electronically. But do you have to follow 91155? Again, those are the regs that specify your VFR cloud clearances. The answer is no. You just have to maintain the required 1 statute mile and clear clouds. So if you guys get any questions on this, feel free to shoot me a text or an email.